The morning snow had already begun to settle over the quiet main street of Willow Creek when Caleb Boone rode in on his chestnut Mari. The town was barely awake. Lanterns flickered behind frosted windows, shopkeepers dragged open wooden doors, and the cold wind carried the scent of smoke and pine. Caleb wasn't a man who came to town often. He preferred the wide silence of the ranch, but winter had a way of forcing everyone closer to civilization. His supplies were running low, and the storm clouds overhead promised worse weather by nightfall. As he tied his horse to the post outside the general store, something tugged at the edge of his awareness. He glanced around, nothing unusual for winter. A few townsfolk hurried along, bundled tight, heads down. But then he saw her, a tiny figure half hidden beside a barrel near the store's entrance. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8, wrapped in a thin shawl that looked more like a scrap of cloth than anything meant for warmth. Her boots didn't match, her dress was frayed at the hem, and her small hands trembled violently as she tried to warm them with her breath. Snowflakes gathered in her hair like fragile white blossoms. Caleb's brows knit together. Kids didn't stand alone in weather like this, not unless something was wrong. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said gently. "You all right?" The girl lifted her eyes, and Caleb felt an unexpected jolt in his chest. They were wide, dark, and full of something he didn't often see in the eyes of a child: fear. The kind that settled deep, the kind that didn't belong in someone so young. For a moment she just stared, as if deciding whether he was safe. Her lips were pale from the cold, trembling as she tried to speak. "Sir?" Her voice was barely louder than the wind. My mom didn't come home last night." Caleb froze. Children got lost sometimes. They wandered. They misbehaved and ran off. But this wasn't that. The way she said it, the tremor in her voice. The way she hugged the torn shawl tighter, as if it were the only thing she had left in the world, it was clear this wasn't. "'Tid the first night she'd waited for a mother who didn't always come home on time. What's your name?" Caleb asked, lowering himself to one knee so he could look her in the eyes without towering over her. "Emily," she whispered. "And your mama? When did you last see her?" Emily blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "Yesterday morning. She said she had work at the lodge. She always comes home late, but she always comes home." Her hands clenched into fists. She didn't this time. Caleb felt something inside him shift, an old instinct, one he hadn't felt in years. Protectiveness. The kind that rose like a storm in a man's chest when someone small and helpless looked to him with trust they didn't even know they were giving. He glanced around. No one else seemed to notice her. People brushed past her without a second look, too wrapped in their own troubles to see a shivering child on the street. "Emily," he said softly, "are you out here alone?" She nodded. "I waited all night, but Mama never came. Our house is real cold. I got scared. The wind cut sharper. The snow swirled thicker." And Caleb Boone, who had planned on picking up flour, rope, a few tools, realized his day had just changed. "All right," he said, standing and offering his gloved hand. "Let's go find your mama." And just like that, the story began with a little girl's fear, a stranger's kindness, and a snowstorm that hid secrets yet to be revealed. Emily's small hand rested in Caleb's gloved one as they walked down the wooden steps from the general store. He could feel how cold she was through the leather, her fingers stiff, almost frozen. The storm hadn't reached its full force yet, but the wind carried a bite sharp enough to cut through any coat that wasn't thick and well-made. Emily had neither. Caleb stopped beside his horse, Daisy, who snorted softly, sensing the tension in the air. He lifted Emily effortlessly and settled her on the saddle blanket. The little girl didn't complain, didn't shift, didn't even seem surprised. She simply sat there, her legs dangling, her hands folded in her lap like a small bird that had grown too tired to flutter. "Emily," Caleb said softly, adjusting the blanket around her. "Can you tell me more? Maybe someone saw your mama yesterday. Maybe someone can help us find where she went." Emily nodded slowly, staring at her hands as if the answers might appear there. "She works at the lodge," she said. "Cleaning rooms, helping in the kitchen when they let her." Her voice cracked. "It's far, though, almost an hour's walk. She always comes back late, but she always—" Her words trailed into the wind, swallowed by the falling snow. Caleb frowned. An hour's walk for a grown woman in good weather was manageable. But in a storm like the one building overhead, it could be deadly, especially for someone already exhausted from long hours and poor living conditions. "And where do you live?" he asked. Emily pointed toward the edge of town, where the land sloped down toward the river and the houses grew fewer and farther apart. "Back there, near the old mill. Mama says it's cheap so we can stay till she finds better." Caleb knew the place. The old mill district had been abandoned years ago after the river changed its course and business dried up. The houses there were run down, drafty, and barely fit for anyone to live in, let alone a child. He tightened the blanket around Emily once more. "We'll start there," he said. "Take a look, see if there are signs of where your mama went. You shouldn't stay out in this cold any longer than you have to." Emily didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to understand why a stranger would care. And then, in the smallest voice, she asked a question that nearly broke him. "Sir, you won't leave me, right?" Caleb felt a knot form in his chest. He had seen fear before. He had seen loneliness. But there was something different in Emily's eyes, something that told him this wasn't the first time she'd felt abandoned. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he wanted to make sure it would be the last. "No, sweetheart," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." He mounted the horse behind her, wrapping one arm protectively around her small shoulders. As they rode toward the rundown outskirts of Willow Creek, the wind picked up, howling through the narrow streets. Snowflakes stung their faces, and the world ahead blurred into a haze of white. Emily leaned back against him, exhausted, trusting him more with every step Daisy took. Caleb's mind raced. A missing mother, a storm closing in, an isolated home far from help. Danger wasn't new to him, but the stakes felt different now. He wasn't just searching for a stranger. He was carrying her daughter in his arms. And with each passing moment, his determination hardened like ice. He would find Clara dead or alive. He owed Emily that much. The ride to the old mill district took longer than it should have. The storm was thickening by the minute, reducing visibility until the world ahead was nothing more than shifting shapes and shadows swallowed by white. Caleb held Emily close against him, shielding her with his coat, feeling her small body shiver through the fabric. Every so often, she tried to sit straighter, to appear brave, but she was a child, and the cold did not care about bravery. By the time they reached the outskirts, the wind had carved drifts along the broken fences and abandoned sheds. The once bustling mill district now looked like the ghost of a town leaning houses, cracked windows, roofs sagging under the weight of years and weather. Caleb guided Daisy carefully down the slope, the horse's hooves sinking deep into untouched snow. Emily lifted her hand and pointed. "That one, the blue one." We live there. Caleb squinted. The blue paint had nearly peeled off, leaving faded streaks like old bruises on the wood. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. The porch steps were crooked, half buried in snow. A door swung slightly in the wind, banging softly against the frame. Every alarm bell in Caleb's mind rang. He dismounted first, lifting Emily gently before setting her down on the porch. She took his hand immediately, fingers cold as ice, gripping harder than he expected. "Stay right by me," he said. The little girl nodded. He pushed the door open. It creaked, a long, lonely sound that echoed through the empty cabin. Inside, the air was frigid, the kind of cold that seeped into walls when fires hadn't been lit for hours. Or days. Caleb's boots crunched over scattered wood chips and dried mud. The front room was small, with a patched rug, a single table, and 2 chairs. A thin blanket lay on the floor near a pile of logs that Emily must have used as a bed while waiting for her mother. Caleb's gaze sharpened. The room wasn't just cold. It felt wrong. "Emily," he said quietly, "did you leave the door open when you came out this morning?" She shook her head immediately. "No, sir. I closed it." "It was closed when I woke up." Caleb crouched low, examining the frame. There were faint scratches near the lock. Fresh. Not made by weather. Made by hands. Someone had forced the door. He stood up slowly, scanning the room with the careful, measured ease of a man who had seen trouble before. A chair lay on its side. A woman's scarf rested on the floor near the stove, torn at one corner. A boot print, half melted from the warmth of whoever had made it, marked the floor near the table. Caleb's stomach dropped. This wasn't an accident. Clara hadn't simply gotten lost or hurt along the path. Something or someone had come here, had entered this home, had taken her. Emily tugged on his coat sleeve. "Sir, is Mama here?" Caleb knelt before her, meeting her eyes. He didn't lie not to a child who'd already been lied to by life far too many times. "No," he said gently. "She's not here right now." Emily swallowed hard. "Did she leave, without me?" Caleb shook his head quickly. "No, I don't think she left on her own." Her eyes widened in fear. Then what happened? He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "That's what we're going to find out." He stood again, walking farther into the cabin. More signs of struggle, an overturned cup, a torn corner of a dress caught on a nail by the door, faint footprints leading back outside and away from town, toward the woods. The storm howled louder. The wind slammed against the roof hard enough to make the walls tremble. Caleb's jaw tightened. Whoever took Clara went into that storm on purpose. Whoever they were, they wouldn't stay ahead of him for long. He turned back to Emily, lifting her into his arms. "Hold tight, sweetheart," he murmured. "We're going after your mama." And with that, the hunt began. Caleb stepped back out into the storm with Emily held firmly in his arms. The wind hit him like a wall sharp, freezing, relentless. Snow whipped across his face, forcing him to narrow his eyes against the white blur. He had tracked cattle through blizzards, found lost calves in the dead of night, crossed rivers in winter, but this storm had teeth he hadn't expected so early in the season. Emily buried her face against his chest, her sobs muffled by the layers of his coat. She wasn't crying loudly. She didn't have the strength for that. Her tears were quiet and trembling, the kind that came from fear rather than sadness. The kind that made a man swear to the cold sky that he'd move mountains before he let anything else hurt her. Caleb mounted Daisy with practiced ease, placing Emily in front of him and wrapping his coat around both their bodies. "You warm enough?" he asked. She nodded, though he knew she wasn't. He clicked his tongue, urging Daisy forward. The mare pushed into the deep snow, steady and sure-footed. Caleb leaned close to the girl's ear. "Emily, sweetheart, I need you to think real hard. Did you hear anything last night? Any noises outside? Anything strange before you fell asleep?" Emily sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. I heard voices. 2 men. They sounded angry. Caleb's breath hitched. Angry? What were they saying? I don't know, she whispered. I was scared. I hid under the table. Mama told me once, when you're scared, hide and don't make a sound. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. Clara had been trying to protect her child in the only way she knew. That meant Clara had likely confronted someone, and she had paid for it. You're doing real well, Emily, he murmured. Do you remember how long they stayed? A little while. Then I heard Mama scream. Then... Nothing, her voice cracked. Caleb felt the words like a punch to the ribs. His jaw locked. His grip tightened on the reins. I'm going to find her, he said, not as a promise, but as a vow. He guided Daisy around the side of the cabin, searching the ground. Even with snow covering the earth, he could still make out faint impressions, boot prints, larger than Clara's, leading toward the tree line. At least 2 men, heavy steps. One dragged something behind them. Or someone. Caleb's stomach clenched. He dismounted, setting Emily down for a moment, but keeping a hand on her shoulder. He crouched low, brushing snow away with his glove. More footprints. More signs of struggle. A broken branch. A spot of dried blood barely visible under the frost. He exhaled slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. They went this way. Into the woods. Emily looked up at him, her eyelashes heavy with snowflakes. Is Mama hurt? Yes, he said quietly, but I don't think she's gone. It wasn't a lie. Clara's blood on the snow told him she was alive when they dragged her. The trail wasn't old enough to suggest otherwise. He lifted Emily again and climbed onto Daisy. We're going to follow the tracks, he said. But you stay against me. Don't look around too much. The woods are rough today. As they rode into the forest, the trees towered above them, dark silhouettes against the storm. The wind howled through the branches, making them groan and sway. Snow fell so heavily that every sound seemed muffled, swallowed by the white world around them. But Caleb wasn't listening to the storm. He was listening to something deeper. Instinct. Experience. Danger. Every nerve in his body told him they weren't far behind the men who took Clara. The storm had slowed them, burdened them. They couldn't have moved quickly dragging an injured woman. Branches cracked somewhere ahead. Emily's fingers clutched his coat tighter. Caleb leaned forward, whispering into the storm. Hold on, Clara. I'm coming. The deeper Caleb rode into the forest, the thicker the snow fell, each flake landing heavy and wet, clinging to his coat, the horse's mane, Emily's trembling lashes. The storm had fully swallowed the woods now, turning everything into a cold, shifting maze. Branches bent low under the weight of ice, sometimes cracking with sharp, sudden snaps that echoed like distant gunfire. Emily flinched every time. Caleb kept his arm around her, pulling her closer. Easy, sweetheart. It's just the trees talking. But even as he said it, he knew the woods were hiding more than winter noises. Something about the silence felt wrong. Too controlled, too purposeful. Danger didn't always announce itself with footsteps. It could sit in stillness, waiting, watching. Caleb stopped Daisy near a cluster of pine trees. The footprints were clearer here, sheltered from the worst of the storm. He studied them carefully. 2 sets of large boot prints, deep and heavy. And then another trail, dragged, uneven. Clara's. Emily noticed too. Her small voice trembled. Is that Mama? Caleb exhaled slowly. Yes, they were pulling her along. He tried to keep the anger from his voice, but it rose like fire in his chest. What kind of men dragged an exhausted woman through a snowstorm? What did they want? What had Clara seen or heard that made her a target? He scanned the area again. The tracks veered left, past a fallen log, then up a small incline. At the top of the slope, the trees thinned. Beyond them, faint light flickered, a glow fighting through the storm. A fire. And where there was fire, there was someone trying to survive the night. Caleb's grip on the reins tightened. "They're close," he whispered. Emily held on to him with both arms. But she didn't cry. She didn't ask to turn back. Something in her had shifted fear mixing with hope. Her mother might still be alive somewhere behind those trees. That belief lit a spark inside her much brighter than any lantern. Caleb guided Daisy off the main path. His movements became slower, quieter, deliberate. Years of ranching had taught him how to move through land without disturbing it, but years of dealing with men who didn't. To always respect the law had taught him something even more important: how to approach danger without announcing himself. He stopped behind a thick cluster of spruce. The flickering firelight glowed just beyond. Voices drifted through the storm, muffled but unmistakable. Two men, rough, laughing. The kind of laughter that made Caleb's skin crawl. He set Emily gently on the ground behind the tree. The snow around them was knee-deep on her, but he pulled his coat around her shoulders and crouched to her level. "Sweetheart, listen to me real close," he said softly. "I'm going to take a look. Just a look. I need you to stay right here. Don't move. Don't make a sound." "Can you do that?" Emily hesitated, fear flickering across her face. Then she nodded. "Please, don't. Don't leave Mama there." "I won't," he promised. His hand briefly cupped her cheek, warm, protective, steadying. Then he stood and moved through the trees like a shadow. The closer he crept to the clearing, the clearer the voices became. One man complained about the storm. The other joked crudely about the woman they'd found near their camp. Caleb felt rage burn under his skin. He crouched behind a tree and peered around it. There, near the fire, two men sat on crates, warming their hands and passing a bottle between them. Their clothes were ragged, their faces unshaven, their eyes sharp with the greed of men who lived on the edge of the law. But Caleb barely looked at them. His eyes instead locked on the third figure, Clara. She lay tied near a stack of supplies, her wrists bound, her face bruised, her hair tangled from being dragged through snow. But her chest rose and fell, breathing, alive. Caleb exhaled slowly, a controlled, burning breath that fogged in the cold air. He had found her. Now he needed to take her back. But one thing was clear: this wouldn't be easy. And the storm wasn't the only danger in these woods. Caleb stayed crouched behind the last tree as the firelight flickered across Clara's bruised face. Relief hit him first, sharp, overwhelming. She was alive. But right behind it came something darker, heavier. Two men, both armed. Both reckless. And both clearly willing to do violence to a woman who'd just been trying to survive. Clara. Caleb scanned the clearing again. One man sat close to the fire, warming his hands. Thick beard. Heavy coat patched with old leather. A rifle leaned against the crates beside him. The other paced, kicking snow, muttering curses about that woman and how she wouldn't keep quiet. His boots stomped angry holes in the snow. A knife glinted at his belt. Caleb's jaw tightened. They'd hurt Clara. They'd scared Emily. They'd dragged a mother into the woods like prey. And Caleb Boone was not about to let that stand. He backed away from the clearing, returning to where he'd left Emily. She sat huddled beneath his coat, shaking from cold and fear, but silent as a mouse, just like he'd asked. When she saw him, her eyes widened. "Is she there?" she whispered urgently. Caleb knelt beside her. "Yes," he said softly, "she's alive. But there are two men with her. I'm going to get her out, but I need you to be brave a little bit longer." Emily nodded quickly, tears welling. "I can be brave. Mama needs me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "That's my girl." Caleb's mind raced. He needed a plan. A distraction. Something to pull the men away from Clara long enough to reach her. He had no rifle, only the small revolver at his hip with 6 bullets, and he couldn't risk gunfire unless absolutely necessary. He couldn't let a stray shot hit Clara or alert them before he reached her. He studied the clearing again from afar. The pacing man was restless, unpredictable. The seated man was slower, probably colder. The fire crackled between them. Beyond, a pile of supply sacks, ropes, a broken lantern. And behind them all, Clara, half-conscious, barely able to lift her head. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He slipped off one glove and reached for a fallen branch covered in ice. He tested its weight. Good enough. A few yards away, a dense patch of bush and low branches hid a tight cluster of trees. If he could lure the pacing man away. He broke the branch in half with a careful, controlled snap. The sound echoed through the woods, sharp, sudden. Both men immediately stiffened. "What the hell was that?" the pacing man barked. The seated man grabbed his rifle. "Wolf? Bear? In this storm?" The other spat. "Could be someone." Caleb's heart thumped slowly, steady as thunder. "Come on, take the bait." The pacing man stomped toward the sound. "I'm going to check it out." "Good." Caleb moved silently, circling the clearing until he was near the opposite side. He waited, watching as the first man vanished into the trees. Now only one guard remained, the seated one. Caleb sank low, approaching like a shadow slipping through the storm. Snow muffled his steps. The firelight flickered across his boots. The guard reached for the bottle beside him, muttering angrily. Idiots probably chasing a rabbit. 5 more steps. 4, 3. The man turned slightly, giving Caleb the opening. Caleb struck fast. He grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him backward into the snow, knocking the wind out of him. The rifle clattered to the ground. The man gasped, swinging wildly. Caleb pinned him down with his knee, clapping a hand over his mouth. "Don't fight," Caleb growled, voice low and dangerous. "You'll lose." The man's eyes bulged. Caleb didn't give him a chance to recover. One swift blow to the jaw, and the man went limp. Caleb exhaled hard. No time to waste. He hurried to Clara. Her eyes fluttered open weakly. "Emily?" she whispered. "She's safe," Caleb murmured, cutting the rope around her wrists. "I'm getting you both out of here." But before he could lift her, a shout tore through the trees. Footsteps pounded to. The shout cracked through the storm like a gunshot, echoing through the forest. Caleb froze for half a second, just long enough to position Clara behind a crate before the crunch of fast, angry footsteps tore through the snow-covered ground. The second man burst into the clearing. He stopped dead when he saw the firelight illuminating Caleb, Clara's cut ropes, and his partner lying face down in the snow. "You!" the man roared, pointing a shaking hand. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Caleb stood tall, one hand hovering near his revolver. "Taking the woman you stole." The man's lip curled in a snarl. "She saw too much. We weren't gonna hurt her, just keep her quiet till we were done with our haul." Caleb didn't buy a word of it. If these men wanted her alive, they wouldn't have dragged her through a storm like an animal. They wouldn't have left bruises on her face. They wouldn't have tied her hands until the rope cut skin. He stepped forward, voice dark and steady. "You let her go, now." The man yanked the knife from his belt as if he'd been waiting for an excuse. "You'll die in the snow before you take anything from me." His boots thundered across the clearing as he charged. Caleb drew his revolver, but he didn't shoot. Emily was somewhere behind the trees. Clara was sitting helpless behind him. The storm blew snow sideways, and visibility shifted every second. A misfire could hit someone he loved. So instead, he sidestepped at the last second. The man lunged past him, stumbling. Caleb grabbed his wrist and slammed it into a tree trunk, making the knife clatter to the ground. The man howled, swinging wildly with his free hand. A fist crashed into Caleb's jaw. Pain shot through him, but he didn't let go. They grappled in the snow, two silhouettes locked in a brutal fight beneath the storm's furious howl. Snow kicked up around them with each struggle, turning the world into a dizzying blur of white and chaos. The man grabbed Caleb's coat and yanked him downward. The revolver slipped from Caleb's grip, disappearing into the snow. Caleb hit the ground hard. The attacker pounced, reaching for the knife again. "You shouldn't have come out here, cowboy," the man snarled. "You should have kept riding." Caleb's blood pounded in his ears. His fingers grasped blindly through the snow until they closed around a chunk of ice-covered wood. He swung it upward with all the strength he had left. The impact cracked loud against the man's temple. The attacker dropped like a felled tree, collapsing into the snow with a heavy thud. His body twitched once, then went still. Caleb lay there for a moment, chest heaving, the cold biting at his sweat-soaked skin. The storm swirled above him relentlessly, but for a brief moment he only heard one thing: the faint sound of footsteps, tiny ones running toward him. "Sir!" Emily burst through the trees, tears streaking down her face, little boots sinking deep in the snow. She threw herself at Caleb, wrapping her arms around his neck with desperate, terrified strength. I saw him chasing you," she sobbed. Caleb held her close, breathing in the scent of fire, snow, and fear clinging to her hair. "It's all right, sweetheart. It's over. I'm okay. You did so good, staying quiet." She pulled back, wiping her cheeks. "Is Mama okay? Did you find her?" Caleb pushed himself to his feet and pointed toward the stack of crates. "She's right there." Emily spun around and ran toward her mother. Clara, though battered and weak, lifted her arms shakily. Emily crashed into her, sobbing into her chest. Clara whispered hoarsely, "My baby, my brave girl." The reunion hit Caleb harder than any punch during the fight. But the moment couldn't last long. The storm was getting worse. The temperature was dropping. Clara could barely stand. And the unconscious man wouldn't stay down forever. Caleb holstered his revolver, scooped Clara into his arms, and said with urgency, "We need to get out of here. Now." The wind had calmed by the time they reached the edge of the abandoned lumber trail, but the cold had only sharpened. Snowflakes drifted downward like slow-falling ashes, settling on the girl's hair as she walked beside Colton, her small boots leaving quick little prints next to his much larger ones. She kept clutching the sleeve of his coat as if it were the only thing tethering her to safety. Colton kept the lantern lifted high, sweeping its glow across the thickening trees. "You're sure your mama came this way?" he asked gently. The girl nodded but didn't look up. "She always walks past the old trees when she comes back from town." She said it's faster. Her voice trembled not from the cold but from the thought she refused to say aloud. Colton understood anyway. Faster? Unless something happened. They walked further until the snow began to crunch differently under their boots. Colton knelt and brushed aside a drift. Beneath it was a narrow, half-collapsed set of tracks, the marks of someone stumbling rather than walking. He pressed his gloved hand to them. Fresh. He stood and glanced at the girl. "These are hers. She was here not long ago." For the first time since entering the woods, the girl's eyes brightened. "Mama? Maybe up ahead," Colton said, though his gut twisted. The tracks wavered, then angled sharply away from the path toward the deeper forest where no one should have been traveling in a storm. He followed them, guiding the girl behind him. Branches heavy with snow creaked overhead. Every few steps he paused, listening. The forest was too quiet. A quiet that suggested exhaustion, collapse, or something worse. A low sound broke the silence. Colton stopped. The girl bumped into the back of his legs. "What is it?" she whispered. He raised a hand. There it was again, a faint moan carried on the wind. Human. Colton surged forward, lantern swaying. "Hello? Can you hear me?" he called. The moan answered, fragile but unmistakably female. The girl gasped, "Mama, Mama!" "Stay behind me," Colton instructed, voice firm but kind. "We're close." Through a cluster of fallen branches, he spotted a shape slumped against the trunk of a spruce tree. Snow piled around the figure, almost swallowing it. He dropped to one knee, brushing away the snow with frantic hands until a woman's pale face emerged, frozen lashes, cracked lips, breath shallow but present. The girl burst into tears. "Mama." The woman's eyes fluttered open at the sound. Her gaze drifted upward, unfocused, until it settled on her daughter's face. "Lila, baby." Colton had already stripped off his outer coat and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "Ma'am, don't try to move yet. You're freezing." "We'll get you warm, I promise." She blinked weakly, confused. "The storm, I fell." "Couldn't?" Her words dissolved into shivers. Colton lifted her gently, mindful of her limp arm. She weighed almost nothing too little, as if hunger and exhaustion had carved her down to bone. He positioned her against his chest to share his body heat. "Sir, will she be okay?" the little girl asked, voice breaking. "She will," he said, with a certainty he forced into his tone, "because we found her in time." But as he began the long trek back toward the ranch, he knew the truth. Finding her was only the first step. The cold had taken too much from her. The night was still long. And whatever had driven a mother to walk through a brutal snowstorm with no coat and no proper boots was a mystery that loomed darker than the forest behind them. Still, he tightened his hold on the woman and reached down to take the girl's hand. "Stay close," he murmured. "We're going home." And for the first time, Lila allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't be alone anymore. The storm was starting to relent, though the wind still whipped through the trees in sharp gusts, scattering snow in sudden blinding flurries. Caleb's arms ached from carrying Clara, but he gritted his teeth, keeping her pressed close to his chest for warmth. Emily ran alongside them, her little boots slipping in the ice, but she refused to let go of his coat. As they moved through the thinning woods, the familiar shapes of Willow Creek's outskirts began to emerge, roofs dusted with snow, crooked fences, and the dim glow of the occasional lantern. It was a sight that filled Caleb with a strange mix of relief and caution. Even though the danger from the men was behind them, the storm could still claim lives if they weren't careful, and Clara's condition was fragile. "Almost there," Caleb murmured, his voice low so as not to startle her. "Just a little farther, Clara. You're safe now." Clara's lips quivered. Her eyes, swollen from crying, searched his face. I didn't think I'd make it," she whispered, voice weak. "Thank you." Emily glanced up at Caleb, her wide eyes brimming with tears. "Sir, thank you for saving Mama," she said, her voice choked but strong. "You didn't leave us." Caleb's chest tightened. He hadn't expected gratitude, especially not from a child, but the raw honesty in her voice hit him in a way nothing else had. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze and motioned toward the faint trail of footprints leading toward the town's outskirts. They moved steadily but cautiously, each step through the snow a battle against fatigue. Clara's small body rested heavily against him, but her hand found his shoulder, gripping it for support. Caleb spoke quietly, encouragingly. "You're stronger than you know. Just a little further." You'll be home soon." When they finally reached the edge of the trees, the lights of Caleb's ranch came into view. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and safety, a stark contrast to the bitter storm they had just endured. Emily squealed softly and ran a few steps ahead, though Caleb quickly scooped her up again to prevent her from slipping on the ice. The ranch door opened, and Caleb set Clara down carefully, wrapping her in an extra blanket he had brought. She sank to the floor in a shivering heap, and Caleb helped her sit near the hearth. The fire's heat began to seep into her cold bones, and for the first time since the ordeal began, her breathing slowed and evened out. Emily climbed onto the small stool beside her mother, holding her hand tightly. "Mama, I was so scared," she said. "But, sir, he kept me safe." Clara's eyes softened as she looked at Caleb, gratitude and awe mingling with exhaustion. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, voice cracking. "You saved my daughter." "And me." Caleb shook his head, brushing snow from his coat. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what needed to be done." He looked down at Emily, who was nestled against her mother. "But I think you two need more than blankets and food tonight. You need somewhere safe to stay." Emily's small voice piped up instantly. "Will you let us stay with you, sir?" Caleb hesitated for just a heartbeat, then nodded. "Yes, you'll stay here until it's safe to return to your home, or until you find a better one. But for now, this is yours." Clara's eyes glistened. I don't know how we'll ever repay you," she said, voice trembling. "You don't need to," Caleb said firmly. "Just rest." "That's all I ask." Emily yawned, finally allowing herself to relax against the warmth of the hearth, and Clara leaned against her daughter, exhausted but alive. Caleb stepped back slightly, letting them settle. Outside, the storm had begun to fade completely, leaving the snow-covered land quiet and serene, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just transpired. For the first time since the little girl had appeared shivering at the general store, the three of them were truly safe. And Caleb knew, deep down, that this night had changed everything, not just for Clara and Emily, but for him as well. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the cozy interior of Caleb's ranch house. Outside, the storm had passed entirely, leaving a pristine layer of snow that sparkled in the pale light of dawn. Inside, Clara and Emily sat close together on a warm blanket, the terror and exhaustion of the past night slowly melting away. For the first time, they could breathe without the icy grip of fear pressing on their chests. Caleb moved quietly around the room, tending to the stove and preparing warm tea. His boots left faint prints on the wooden floor, but he made no effort to hide them. This was a home now, a place of safety. Clara watched him, eyes still swollen from crying, and whispered softly, "I don't know how to thank you enough, Caleb." He shook his head. "You don't need to. The important thing is that you're both safe. That's all that matters." His voice was steady, but inside, a warmth unlike the fire flickered through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Seeing them together, alive and unbroken, stirred something he had long thought dormant. Emily, sitting with her small hands wrapped around a steaming mug, looked up at him with a shy smile. "Sir, will you stay for breakfast?" she asked. "Mama says you saved us, so you should eat first." Caleb chuckled softly, a low sound that seemed to blend with the rhythm of the fire. "I suppose I could eat," he said. "But only if you promise to finish your breakfast too, Emily." The little girl nodded enthusiastically, her earlier fear replaced by the comfort of warmth, food, and safety. She leaned against her mother, whispering excitedly, "Mama, he really didn't leave us." "He kept his promise." Clara smiled weakly, reaching out to squeeze Caleb's hand in gratitude. "I never imagined someone like you would just appear and save us. I don't even know how you found us." Caleb shrugged modestly, though his mind replayed every detail of the night. The snow, the tracks, the storm, the desperate fight with the men. I just followed the trail, that's all. Sometimes you do what needs to be done. For a long moment, the three of them sat in quiet companionship, listening to the soft hiss of the fire and the distant crunch of snow settling outside. It was a peace earned through struggle, a moment of calm that seemed almost too perfect after the terror of the previous hours. Finally, Clara spoke, voice firm but still trembling. "We can't go back to that house. Not after last night. We need a fresh start." She glanced at Emily, who nodded silently. Caleb met her gaze, understanding immediately. "Then you'll stay here," he said, "as long as you need. My home is yours now, at least until you're ready." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, and Emily threw herself into Caleb's arms in gratitude. "Thank you, sir. Thank you," she cried. He hugged her back, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a lightness he hadn't felt in years. There was no longer fear, no longer helplessness. Just trust, warmth, and the quiet beginnings of a bond that promised safety and family. Outside, the sun began to rise, casting soft golden rays across the snow-covered ranch. It was a new day, a clean slate. Inside, Clara and Emily settled near the fire, laughing softly over small stories and quiet chatter. Caleb poured another cup of tea, standing back to watch them. For the first time, he realized that his life had changed too. The little girl who had appeared in the snow, shivering and alone, had brought more than just a rescue mission. She had brought hope, connection, and the possibility of family. And as the warmth of the hearth spread through the room, Caleb knew this was only the beginning. They were together, safe and alive. Tomorrow, they would rebuild. But tonight, they simply existed in the quiet miracle of being found, being saved, and being home. The storm was gone, but the new life it had brought lingered, bright as the morning sun on the snow, a promise of hope, love, and the bonds that endure.